Welcome to our next session at our Developing Delaware Conference. I'm Kelly Basil with the Delaware State Chamber, and I have with me Patrick Callahan, co-founder of CompassRed, a data analytics and data science company. CompassRed was recently ranked by Inc. magazine as one of the top 1,000 fastest growing companies in the country and in the top 100 data companies in the world. Earlier today, we heard from Gary Laban, who revealed insights from a recent survey they performed on people who moved or considered a move to Delaware in the last 10 years. Patrick is one of those people. He founded CompassRed in San Francisco, but moved the company to Delaware in 2016 to establish a footprint in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. Patrick joins us today to help us understand our state and Delawareans through data so that we can better understand our community in order to make strategic decisions around economic development. Patrick, we thank you for being here today. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, Chamber members from a booth somewhere in Wilmington, Delaware, and welcome to a day of data. 10 years ago, we would not have been having this conversation, not just because of COVID, but because of the advances in data have been so swift and mind-blowing that what you have access to today just wasn't that easy 10 years ago. In many ways, COVID has put an even greater spotlight on data as companies transform themselves literally overnight. Everyone remembers what they were doing in March. Today, I'm going to be describing the elements around data collection and analysis, discuss the concept of people analytics, and review where you can begin accessing data within and outside the state. I also have an important announcement that I'd like to make at the end of the presentation, so please don't put me on mute. The discussion could not come at a more important time for us here in Delaware. We are faced with some incredible changes, but even greater opportunities. Innovation and the concept of leveraging data will be one of the factors that helps drive our recovery. And I know our leadership in the state and the business community are making headway. In fact, earlier this week, I had a call with our state's DelDOT Chief Innovation Officer, Veronica Vanderpool, a brilliant forward-thinking mind that came down from New York. We're extremely lucky to have her in our state. Her passion and interest is to develop a more sustainable society. And she feels strongly that to do that, we must include mobility options. It increases our economic value. She will need to leverage every piece of data to do that. And she's on her way through some of the fascinating pilots that they will be implementing. I'll be talking a little bit about those data sets today. That's just a small example of some of the things that are happening today. And it's at its core is data and things that you should be aware of. Next slide. So as Kelly mentioned, I just want to mention a little bit about us. We're a data science and data analytics company in Wilmington, Delaware. That may not sound interesting. It's not interesting to my life until you fully understand what we do. We find data sets. We apply a bunch of math, and then we produce predictions. This is the core and foundation of the new world of artificial intelligence. What drives us is the thought that our work is being used to fill baseball stadiums right down the street, predict prices for global companies, make better hoagies, and even save lives, which really drives us. We can see and measure those results. And it's part of the reason data-related jobs have skyrocketed to the top of all economies. We started in San Francisco in 2012. It's the mecca of ideas and the birthplace of a lot of today's new technology. It's where ideas can sometimes divorce reality. Does anyone remember the $100 million sock puppet in the 2000s? And sometimes the price of life out there can also be divorced from reality. We moved back to Delaware to take advantage of being in the Northeast region. It's affordable, and Delaware is a great place to do business. Ideas can be born outside and put to reality here. Our clients in a 5-mile radius here are global. We've been here for 4 years. We employ some of the region's top data scientists, analysts, and data engineers, subject matter experts in chemistry, finance, and consumer products. We are committed to the state to build a base from which we can expand nationally. And our team here creates predictions, does AI, makes visuals, and does all the amazing things that happen in San Francisco, but a lot easier and a lot more price. This is not a commercial for Delaware, but it's a realistic application of it. We started at the mill right downtown. and have really relocated to CSC's Innovation Center right next to the train station in downtown Wilmington. It gives us a place during normal times to attract talent from Philadelphia and other regions. So going on to the next slide. Our everyday is working with interesting data sets, from census data, which we'll talk a little bit about, to weather, to social data, or data that comes out of Twitter and so many other places, Pinterest, Facebook. What we produce are insights that are manifested in dashboards, APIs, predictions, some things that I don't even know about. Sometimes we're even building data warehouses these insights are stored in, data lakes, data ponds, etc. It's interesting enough though, some of our insightful data is when organizations mix their internal data with some of this external data. Probably the most important part of everything we do is help define the question, which is something I'll talk a little bit about today. Because everything is based on a business problem or a question that's defined. And if you don't get that right, everything downstream is worthless. More on that later. Moving on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, data has become super important. If you don't recognize this dashboard in your view now, you probably recognize the name. It's the Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard. 8 months ago, it didn't exist. Now today, it's one of the most referenced dashboards in the world. A little secret, and if you read the story about it, it is not and was not that complicated to create. The team at Johns Hopkins started out in the beginning of the COVID crisis with specific questions. They then went out to find the data. The majority of the data is free. It's open to you. You could go and download it right now and can be implemented fairly easily, even in Excel. The data sources included Johns Hopkins University, the Red Cross, the Census American Community Survey, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The visualization can be created in the simplest forms from using spreadsheets or from free tools that exist on the internet. It involved 4 key pieces: define the question, find the data, analyze it, and then visualize it. This dashboard is visited globally each day by millions of people. Policy decisions are made by it. Economies are shut down globally because of what it states. And it was created by 4 people in Baltimore, Maryland, in a coffee shop, just figuring it out in a week. That was only 8 months ago. Moving on to the next slide. Another example of data sets that I wanted to show you was developed by the Opportunity Atlas. It's right out of Harvard. It's a site designed out of Harvard by researchers and policy analysts working together to create and analyze new data and create a platform for local stakeholders to make more informed decisions. They leverage data sets to analyze economic trends, how or even if COVID affects certain communities disproportionately, and there's so much more information we get into it. As we zoom in, we can see a ton of information about our state down to the very detailed level. If we go to the next slide, you'll see a snapshot of the state of Delaware. And here you can compare income levels, race, gender, education levels, and so much more down to a street or even a zip code level. If you go on to the next slide, you can see even more information. In this, you can compare levels of race, gender, education, as I mentioned, down to the street level. In fact, there's just a little bit about it, which you can't find. You don't even try to read it. It may be too small in here. But let me read off some of the things that, that all this data can produce. Household income, incarceration rate, teenage birth, individual income, fractional marriages, spousing, it goes on and on and on. And the analysis can pretty much answer anything you come up with about your business, like those, like some of the businesses that are using some of this data in the chamber today. Going on to the next slide. All these data sources are open and free to you. Yes, even in Excel. If you see on this, and it may be difficult to read, but you can actually go and download these Excel documents just from going to the website. And if you need it, I'll provide it for you. Let's talk a little bit about how you actually go about doing this and some of the major steps. If we go on to the next slide. So where do we get started and how do you do this? This slide is appropriate for the CEO, the CMO, or even the person doing the actual work. The number one thing that you have to do, as I mentioned earlier, is define the question. What are you trying to answer? And that's probably where we spend a significant amount of time when we analyze data sets. The second thing you have to do is then search for the data and try to answer that question. And you iterate on that. You know, identify the data, where is it coming from, how realistic and how valuable it is. You've got to clean it. Sometimes it's not so clean. Then you got to put the data somewhere, whether it be in an Excel spreadsheet or a database. And then you want to analyze it. And then you develop it further. And then what do you do with it? You try to visualize it or make sure people can actually use it. If we go on to the next slide, the people that you want to involve in your team, and this could be all just one person, or it could be a team of scientists like we have here. But you have the subject matter expert. You have someone who really understands the question. If you're dealing with the most complicated chemical processes or the banking statements, or even the most simplistic, trying to find out who's moving from where, you've got to have someone who understands that subject matter. The next thing is the subject matter, and then you have Google. There's someone who can Google that stuff. And then you have a database developer. So where do we put this stuff? And then cleaning it, you have the data engineer, and then you have the data designer, analyst, or the data scientist that produces the result. That's typically what a team looks like. But again, that can be all done in just one person. So what we've done is we said why and what we're searching for. Then we said, this is the how would you use that data? Let's just shift a little bit and talk about people analytics and what that actually means. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to introduce the concept of people analytics. And traditionally, people analytics, and it's going to be a term you're hearing more and more about in the business world, it's fundamentally related to HR, but we'll be able to apply it towards the way that we're searching for people to attract to the state. So fundamentally, it's a way to unpack what's working for your business. People drive profit and goals. It's not the other way around. If we can create the best environment for our people to be successful, then that's what makes our company or even our state successful. Leveraging data, you can begin to understand the people itself. So I'm going to go through the different pieces here. You know, in the life cycle of trying to bring someone into your company or into your organization or into our state, we want to figure out how do we attract, hire, onboard, develop, retain, and then there's also separate. That's the life cycle of a person. Other than the person, data is the unifying element across all these different streams. Normally, you look at them in a silo. HR, you recruit, you hire. Then you're doing analysis of people, of how they operate in the business. And then when they leave, you're doing exit interviews, and they're all done by separate people. But if you start to structure the way you look at this stuff, there's a string that goes through it in detail. So going on to the next slide here. Let's focus on just for a second, just one of them, the attract. Where are we getting people from? Do I have to build new pipelines to bring people into the state or into my business? How do we assess those pipelines? Back to asking the questions. We want to look at the data that requires us to answer some of these fundamental questions. What does best even mean for existing and for prospective people that we're bringing in? Inherently, resources are limited, so you want to make sure that importantly, that you've identified these pipelines and what's actually good and what's not, so that we're not wasting this time. Again, going back to that fundamental question, what does best even mean? Why are we attracting people from California into the state of Delaware? What type of people do we want to attract? What type of businesses make sense? So doing all that data analysis will help answer those questions. Another question, let's go on to the next slide. Moving pipelines to people. Ultimately, it's the same type. Like, what is a strong candidate? What data are we collecting to ensure that there's a strong candidate? People who come from X background, are they successful? All these questions is what we should be asking and analyzing. Let's go on to the next slide here. To tell you a little anecdote, we put out a request to hire 2 data scientist interns during the summer of this year. We got over 159 results. And these are fascinating interns. They're from MIT, they're from University of Pennsylvania, University of Delaware, they're from Stanford, 159. So how do we build a model to shortlist those right people? What are the issues that we should be resolving so that we can actually do that? It's impossible for us to go through 159. And imagine if you're DuPont, Amazon, M&T, you've got to quickly go through those things. So understanding what type of person operates well in your environment and what would make them thrive is something that you want to identify and dive into the data, so the people analytics before you actually hire them on. Let's move on to the next one. There's a little risk in this as well, and I just want to make mention of that. When you're designing algorithms to bring people either to a state or to your business, and it's about bias. If you haven't heard about it, about 10 years ago, or maybe even shorter, Amazon, a team out of Dublin, Ireland, was creating a model to say, like, look through all the people that we have internally and find out who the really smart ones are. And then let's match and make an algorithm to go through all these applications. Unfortunately, historically, the technology environment is historically white and male. So they put the, Amazon put the algorithm on their resumes that they were bringing in. And as it mentions here, it penalized resumes that included the word women's or women's chess club captain. And that's not the kind of person that Amazon, that's not the environment that they wanted. So they ultimately scrapped it, and it didn't work. So machines can't always replace the human decision. We've got to make sure that you have some thought and the human behind it, so that we're not just putting a machine on something. Machines are really the smartest dumb things around. It only can operate off the data that comes into it, but it's something to consider. So moving on to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the external data that we have access to us. So going back, we talked about the importance of data. And nowadays, it's impossible for you to not utilize data externally to be able to help inform some of the decisions that you're making today. If you're not doing it, the competition is doing it. If our state's not doing it to attract business, New Jersey is. So we have to really consider that. That's the what. The how is, again, you've got to ask the questions right. Then you've got to access the data correctly. And then you've got to analyze it and then put it and think about how you're going to deploy that or put that into a good place. People analytics, just as a reminder, is the thing that actually says, how do we analyze the people that we want to bring or attract? Where are we going to go after? We can't just cast a net and say, let's just attract people, because if we're more targeted in our way of bringing people into the state, we'll be better off. Now let's talk about this is the fun stuff. Let's look at some of the data sources that are out there. In our state, we have an amazing data source available to us. Our governor and members of DTI created the Delaware Open Data Portal Initiative, and that opened up several data sets for us. The Delaware Open Data Portal, we can get the URL to you, but it's data.delaware.gov. And there are tons of data sets that are available to help you analyze your business, to help us analyze how we're going to attract people. And there's also open data sets for Newcastle County. What's even better is on a national scale, there's data.gov. And basically that gives you entire data sets, thousands of them, that are available for your use, or even other states have individual ones as well. So the open data movement happened about 4 years ago, and it's really changed the way that society has been accessing the data sets that they can use internally. More external data sets are used to make decisions internally to a business than any other time. Let's go on to the next slide. But there's more. So here's something that's interesting. Mobility reports from Apple and Google, and there's a ton of other places as well, help provide understandings of movements of people across our state lines. And this is anonymized. This isn't us looking into the creepy factor of like, where are you moving? It's actually looking at like population movements. It was incredibly important at the beginning of the COVID crisis to find out, are we getting a lot of people moving in and out of our state, so that we can help manage that and make sure that COVID's not spread. But that can be used for other great reasons as well. And that could be, are we seeing more people come in from California? Or are we seeing more people come in from New Jersey or Maryland? And what details can we look into that? Weather and historical and projected data sets are out there that we can use. Data.world is another example that presents tax rates in New Jersey. so that we can then, as a state, start targeting communities in that specific area and say, hey, you should probably consider moving to Delaware, especially those businesses or individuals that are highly taxed. We've got a great state here. Understanding the data in the other states could make a huge impact on who we bring along. Do you want to know about the complaints in the transit in New Jersey? There's a data set for that as well. There's pretty much anything that you can't imagine that we can't get. The challenge is, if for those of you who grew up at a time when you saw Blockbuster Video, you used to go into a small little video shop and there used to be 5 videos. So it really wasn't that hard to pick out what you're gonna watch that night. Nowadays you go into Netflix and how many people get stuck into going through movie after movie after movie after movie. So it becomes much more difficult. And that's why I can't reiterate it again. The question is the key. It's so hard to figure out what you wanna watch. You decide that first and then you go and you find it. In the same form, you figure out the questions that you're trying to ask and then you go forward from there. Let's go on to the next slide. This is an example of data.world, and they can show the stuff in New Jersey as well as other communities, but there's so many other elements that we could see that I could spend days on. We did a highly involved analysis of Texas recently just to understand what businesses are being developed, what taxes are moving people, how is education affecting other communities, and so much more, because that's data.world and it might be useful. But you don't even have to just think of data sets. If you go to the next slide, you have something existing in you that's very, very simple. You just go into Google, and I think majority of the world's done that, and you type in trends, Google Trends, and you might be able to find data sets that don't exist before, but what you'll be able to see is answer some questions. So I went into Google Trends here, and I believe it's trends.google.com, and I put in small business in Delaware. And basically, if you see on the right-hand side, on the bottom, you can start to see what other people are looking for who are typing those words in. And that can provide insight. So if you're a banker or someone else in the finance industry trying to attract small business, you want to know what's interesting to them. And here in the last month, the top 10 searches could be listed out: small business loans, business letter formations, different components like that. So look at Google and all the things that they have, Google Correlate, Google Trends, as elements that could be informing you as well. It's something that I could spend days on. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked about data sets that you can download. You've talked about Google and using trends and analysis as that, but there's also social data. So people in our state are online talking more than ever before. They're doing things on Reddit, they're doing things on Pinterest, they're doing things on Facebook and that kind of stuff. And there's public data sets. So again, this is not a creepiness factor. This isn't us trying to go down into the individual, but we can start to see what people are talking about. Yesterday, I went into a tool, and this is called Brandwatch, to understand what people were talking about that specific day. And of course, in Delaware, people were talking about COVID. They're talking about the president because in our time right now, we just had the last presidential debate, or the vice presidential debate. And so this is at the top of everybody's conversations. You can then focus on, like, I'm going to do a search in business, and what are people talking about in business in social media? That becomes a very big data set and a very impactful one that you could use for insight into whatever question you're trying to answer. Let's go to the next ones. We can also see trends. Here's a trend analysis of what's breaking news. White House was being discussed, but it's starting to fade away. And what are the blogs people are sharing, and the news articles they're sharing? Where in the state of Delaware are they talking about these things the most? There's quite a bit of information that you could find out. Going on to the next slide. So, this is just in summary. The economy in and around our region is changing. We're becoming highly dependent on data. Whether you're Corteva, M. Davis, Delmarva Power, a small company selling coffee and mobility, ShopRite trying to find thousands of people to fill your jobs, data is becoming increasingly important to you and informative. You have the capability of leveraging data to inform specific questions designed by you, whether you're determining a trend or analyzing a group. People analytics are becoming more important to understand your workforce, the regions and the workforce around you. And there are more data sets available that you could possibly know right now. It's the question that becomes the most important thing. I've laid out a few data sets that are available to you. Start with open data, start with Google, start with something that's at your fingertips. If you're a more advanced company and you've got a data science team, really make sure that you're answering the right question. You've dived down into that specific area. There's tool sets that are available. This one picture that we have up here is NodeXL. And if you look into that, that's basically taking all Twitter's data and it's grouping it. And they're saying here is how people are talking about that a specific topic within that group. So it's the opportunities are boundless, and there's a lot of great things that we can get from there. So I want to end on the next slide about a really exciting announcement that we have going on that's actually going to be impacting all Delawareans at some point soon. Recently, because of COVID and all that kind of stuff, and because of things I've mentioned, that there's been a focus on the need for data to be able to understand how to address COVID or how to address our community as well. We've been extremely fortunate to receive a grant to create Delaware's first data innovation lab. And I'm not even sure that this exists in the United States, but there's, you have the MIT Media Lab and you have other things. And usually what happens is ideas or research come to these innovation labs, and then businesses are born out of them that drive an economy. We're super excited. We just heard the news, and there'll be more information coming out about this. But I do believe fundamentally, and no region around us actually has this, this will be something that helps drive our economy. In the state of Delaware, we have some of the most, and this is why we brought our company back here. We have some of the most brilliant minds that have been behind the walls of big companies doing extremely great things. But now we can draw them out to help drive our economy, to help save our lives, to help save our economy and innovation. So more to come on that. I'm super excited about this. Our team is just ecstatic to be able to do this for our community. And I think there's a lot to be learned from this. I'll put the last slide. This is my phone number, my cell phone. Feel free to call me. My email is there as well. Again, we're right down on the waterfront. There's a lot of great opportunities here to draw business in. And I know the Chamber is really getting involved in this underneath Mike's leadership and Kelly and Elena's support with this. So I can't thank you enough for having me in today, and looking forward to talking about this more. Thank you.